Okay, so Scott, very nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
We're here talking a little bit about This Ink Runs Cold, and I thought it might be interesting to just show a little bit of the process that we're going through, one of the stories for it. And Scott is here at Comic-Con drawing, so I'll flip this camera around if I figure out how to do that, and then we'll maybe take a look at the artwork as you're working on it and see how that goes.
Yeah, this is a super cool little story that came in that I am pleased was shared. So I'm very thankful to Jeff for this thing becoming part of it.
So
it kind of hits a bunch of little sweet spots that I like, kind of Flash Gordon-y and all the like weird little bubblehead sci-fi stuff without the bubblehead, I guess.
So this whole book that's going to come together is just full of one-page stories, and it has like a sci-fi and crime theme. And I'm curious, like, what made you kind of gravitate toward that as a theme for it? So it's not just the sci-fi crime, but specifically like one-page stories for something like this.
Oh, okay. I wanted something that I could get as many people as possible under the same umbrella. New people that I didn't know mixing with people that I do know, as far as writers go, to piggyback kind of new talents off of old talent. Not old, but established. Unestablished versus established. Let's establish some new voices, using kind of one consistent style. The crime and sci-fi angle was to just kind of give it a cohesive theme, I think. That while they're not obviously the same characters from story to story, there's a similar aesthetic that I can kind of chase. And usually those kinds of shapes and that kind of thinking just I gravitate towards. I like old noir. I like kind of retro future sci-fi stuff. And it seemed like a good happy medium because I feel like a lot of people kind of latch onto that aesthetic.
So can you walk us through a little bit of what you're doing now?
Yeah, I'm drawing a very weak upper arm on a Harkonnen type bad guy character. And I think when you scripted it, you had him in as like a gangster or like a mob boss kind of character. If I'm right, is that right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just took that like idea of bad guy and real jerk of a bad guy that might exist in the Flash Gordon kind of universe, and started thinking about those shapes and those ideas. So like his hair isn't really hair; it's these weird like pieces of scrap metal or something that are attached to his head. So there's a little bit of a steampunk aesthetic. And then the story was kind of calling for this, as it evolves, as you wrote it, it's this idea that like he's sucked dry of a lot of his bodily juices and what makes you a person. So kind of treating him as like pudgy and flabby and wrinkly, so that can really kind of capitalize on the suction scene when we get there in a minute. So I'm thinking of those kinds of shapes.
So I know one of the things that I was thinking, at least when I put this very small idea together, was just like what's the like the convergence between like this almost like mid-century science fiction hero with maybe like a 1920 Chicago or something like that, and to kind of have those kind of collide together and what that might look like.
That's cool. I like that you kind of took both themes and swabbed them together. I mean, I guess I kind of squeezed a little bit more of the gangster out of it and made it lean heavily into the sci-fi of it.
I mean, at least for me, that's kind of the beauty of collaboration, because you put something in and then what comes out is just a little bit different. But oftentimes it's better, and it's beautiful, and I think that there's probably a little bit more cohesive on your end than what I originally thought about. But I wanted to actually ask you about the dialogue here.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that probably we both noticed, and certainly you just mentioned to me, was that there's a lot, right? So there are a lot of words here, and honestly, that's probably a failing of mine.
I wouldn't say failing.
Well, I one of the things I try to do is, or I have tried to do within the last however many years, is minimalize a little bit and let the story kind of tell itself. Obviously, the challenge with a one-page story is trying to, even though we just have one scene here, and we're hinting at maybe a larger world or a larger relationship between especially these two characters, you still have to have a very limited amount of space.
Sure.
And from an artist's perspective, one of the things I'm interested in is just like, if you get a script, maybe for something a little more formal, and you realize that there's a lot of text here, like how do you go about doing that? You just say, hey, you need to change this. You try to fit it all in. You try to find some kind of medium ground or middle ground. Like, how do you deal with that?
I typically will read a script, and it's not just with this; it's with film too. You get a film script, and that's always the starting point for when you're creating something that's a visual piece of storytelling. Because the two, when you're writing, you're also writing with images. So, what's the intent of what the script put there? What was your intent? And then how can I take the spirit of that at the very least and get that across in full? But then I try to give full credit to everything you wrote. And if all that dialogue works, there's no reason to get rid of any of it. If I'm not confused, that's kind of how I entered into these things was, did I get confused? How hard did I have to work? Was it clear? Was it easy to understand? And if it wasn't, if that was in the writing, and a visual could save that, and still, the story is still great, but a visual is going to help that get lifted to the surface. What's the visual that I could put there and not these words? And I feel like I think we're using all of your dialogue. I don't think I tweaked anything. The only thing that I might tweak is because I changed how he's quote unquote tied up, or our hero's tied up. He's like bolted down kind of more. Is the idea that he says, you probably should have had you untie me at the end. That still speaks to like what's going on with him, and I think we get it, that he's tied up. Yeah. I don't know that that's even worth changing, but like that's the only real question I have as far as dialogue in it. And I think it works fine, so I'm not making an effort to like stall the process because of it by any means.
So what mediums are you working in?
I am working in, I like to give myself a box usually for projects like this where I'll give myself specific tools, specific papers, this is what I'm going to draw with. So I started with these, it's a Pentel clickable, refillable pencil for the line work just to keep it all consistent and loose. I always tend to use a Statler eraser because it picks up the pencil when you're done the best in my mind. For inking, I'm using the crappiest brushes I could find in a multi-pack at Blick, and I'm typically not precious with the tools that I'm using when it comes to that kind of thing.
Well, they've got a booth here. Did you buy them there?
I did, and I bought them back and open before I left. But I bought a pack that had a variety of things, and what I'm after in that variety is a flat brush, typically for bigger shapes, a wider round brush for bigger shapes that need a tapered tip, and then a thinner brush. And I've really only been using the thinner brush for everything on these pages. The lettering, the line work, the washes, like all of it has been consistently the same brush. These are out for backup for like effects and things like that. And even with the flat brush, I'm not laying in big shapes a lot of the time. I'm using the edge of the brush to like get thicks and thins and shapes out of it. Maybe we'll get there on this. I don't know, but I'm typically just using that. And then ink, I'm literally just using Higgins Black India drawing ink. That's a waterproof ink that I can use as a wash, and will allow the pencil to get erased out. So it's not by any means the best ink, but it will give me a variety of grays as we're working, and it's forgiving on this kind of paper, which is. It's a cold pressed bristle board it's a 2-ply, it's nothing crazy. It's like, I call it cold pressed, but it's a vellum. So it has a little more tooth to it. It's not smooth. It's got a little like grit to it. And that allows the watercolor or the wash to kind of spread in a different way.
So when it comes to the wash, is that like an aesthetic choice? Are there like publication concerns that you might have? I mean, not concerns, but like the choice that you're making to publish this in a particular style. Is that for like consistency? Is that for like the noir effect that you might be getting from it? Like what's the reasoning behind it?
It gives everything an organic quality, and even when I think of like old timey stuff, I'm thinking of like film grain. I'm thinking of like long lenses that soften things up. So I'm thinking of light. I'm trying to think of things that help give an impressionistic feel and fade out. I like give the impression of a background, give the impression of air, give the impression of light, shadow being dropped in, and not being as literal as you need to be, but using those as compositional elements. The washes also give like a warmth to it that kind of make it feel organic and supple, and like there's a texture, like a truth in materials to it. So it feels like there's cloth or layers on metal, or how shadows might naturally fall or diffuse over something and not be hard if you don't want them to be. So that was kind of my idea with chasing the wash. A lot of it's harkening back to kind of an era aesthetic too, of like
sure
EC Comics mixed with kind of a Mad Magazine feel, mixed with kind of a my shot at a Will Eisner kind of tribute, where things are a little more organic and I can get lettering to be part of the image, get the washes to be basically have a cohesive piece of art for the writer to take away at the end of this, for a collector to have, so that the page itself is a piece of art that's complete, but also something that I can work with in production. Because at this point it looks like Jose Villarrubia may be coloring it all, which could be really cool, but we're talking about doing it, keeping the aesthetic of what we're doing as a singular value, but maybe just doing it in a two color, so that we're popping shapes using like two colors in a monotone, a duotone kind of feel. Not monotone.
One of the things that we had talked about just a few minutes ago, and one of my big concerns about this video is just that it's loud in here.
It is.
From my perspective, I am easily distracted, and usually when I write, I need silence, basically. Like I don't have music on, I don't have the television on. I'm just kind of in my own room with as few distractions as possible, I guess. And I'm curious how just kind of the din that surrounds us now, how that might affect just what you're doing, and just, doing this at a Comic-Con, doing it at the Comic-Con, I guess, is a kind of an interesting choice to do, and something that I thought sounded really fun. But how does that affect what you're doing now, as opposed to maybe how you would do it just if you were home or in your studio?
The overall end product of what's happening would probably be about the same, honestly. The cacophony that's kind of happening around us, the distracting part is when people come up and want to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm doing that right now, so this is speaking out of both sides of my mouth, because I'm able to multitask it. There's certain elements of it that I really do need to concentrate on and can't get distracted while I'm doing, and that's really the lettering. And I've lettered it once already, but when I go in and ink actually lay in the final lettering, I want it to be at least 90% of what will be in the final page. I don't want to make a lot of digital corrections if I don't have to. And I want it to feel right, because there is a mark making that comes to that's a little more, you have to be in sort of a Zen state, at least I do, to get those lines to work and get those marks, icons to work in the lettering. It's different when I'm inking like line work like this and shapes, because this is a little bit more like jazz, and jazz music is inherently, sound anyway. So you have to kind of be able to concentrate and in a heightened state while you're being creative doing that, because it is a conversation, and it's almost like I'm having a conversation between the brush, the ink, and the paper. And there's a flow that can kind of happen with that. And if I can kind of drift into sort of another state of focus while I'm doing it, even while I'm talking, I can get better line work, and I can find happy accidents that I'm not being precious with it. I'm being precious to the process, but not precious with the with every single line. I'll find solutions to problems I'll present to myself. Like if I get a line wrong, I can find a fix to it, a way to hide it. It's another reason that the pencils are arguably loose, is because I don't adhere to them. They're really just a gesture towards where the major blocking will go, and an inspiration for what I'm going to do with the line work. Like the sword hilt that I'm working on right now, there's no, like these details that are in there that I'm going to put in there aren't in the pencils. The drawing phase is actually the inking. And it's a whole different way of penciling and inking that wouldn't make me a good candidate to work as a penciler alone. Because it's all part of one process in my mind.
So this book brings a lot of different writers together, and you're going to be drawing the whole thing together. Will you be writing one of the stories, or at least for yourself?
I wrote and drew one as an example for when I sent out the original submission. And given the page count and where we want to hit, and the amount of the 24 submissions that we got in of people that I wasn't as on a friendly, give them a call basis, or didn't even know them, maybe knew them as a name on the internet, or didn't know them at all. The rising writers, or whatever, as you would have it, at least in my mind. That was allotted to 24, and then I wanted at least another 24 of friends that I could call that were either writers or are writer artists that I thought would be kind of a fun experiment to create together in a way that usually we don't get to. This seemed like an opportunity to grow, for me to see how they would approach writing, for them to see how I would approach drawing, and for us to kind of play together a little bit.
Do you usually work like linearly, and by that I mean just like panel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or do you jump all over the place, or is it just a matter of like what's on the page?
Penciling, I work in chronological order, but inking, you'll see me jump all over. And especially with this, because I'm obviously not using a ruler and being really anal about all these shapes. It's all organic. So I don't quite know if there will be panel borders yet. I don't know how the panel borders will work to differentiate the different panels. There may just be a wash that fades off, and it might be an open feeling panel. There might be a harder edge, but I want to leave that open. I'm going to get the characters in so that they pop, and then I'm going to go back into where the lettering was at and letter, and then I'll figure out where the balloons work and where the framing devices will kind of work as far as background and light, that kind of thing. So I want to pull the character line up first, so I'm doing that now while you're here. Plus, it's kind of the fun stage to see, because you actually see the characters come along.
Right. And maybe I need reminded on this too. What was the the original call for submissions? What were the broad strokes on that?
What do you mean? Like in what way?
Well, when you asked, when you opened it up to submissions from different writers, like what were you asking of them?
I wanted them to play a little bit and to remember to try to keep in mind the puzzle of working with an artist. Writing isn't, you may write colorfully that will evoke a visual, but being open to how an artist is going to interpret those visuals to better tell a visual story in sequence is a real trick for a lot of writers to grapple with. And a writer-artist knows how they do it in their own brain, but when you separate those two things, it can give a writer a feeling of, why didn't you follow my script?
Sure. When
in reality, this isn't about your script.
Right, yeah.
This is about us working together. And I'm not picking on you by any means. You did a fantastic job. I feel like it's a great collaboration, like we're collaborating in a good way. But writers are notorious for feeling, and this has been perpetuated a lot of the time in film, TV, and in comics, that that's the most important job.
You could probably just finish it with just writers are notorious for feeling, and that would tell the story itself. But so with those, and from my perspective anyway, the guidelines were a little bit loose, where we had kind of like broad strokes that we were thinking about.
Yeah.
Do you think that the submissions that made it in, Do you think you saw a real difference in some of the stories that were coming in? Did you see a lot of similarities? Like what was that kind of whittling down process like for you?
Surprisingly, there were similarities. Some storytellers had surprisingly similar gimmicks that would happen in their story, and I say gimmick because it's a one-pager and you have to come up with some sort of hook to make it work, to make it feel like there's a journey that's happening on the page, and that there's a punctuation at the end, whether that's a gag or a funny visual or a cliffhanger or what have you. So some people had similar cliffhanger endings, and there are a couple that, there's a sci-fi and a crime one that have a very similar ending. And we may place those together in the book just for fun. They're not the same story by any means, but they have a similar structure and a similar device.
So what are, and I talked a little bit about, maybe being a little dialogue heavy on my end. Like, what are some of the challenges for you for telling, just a one-page story, something that has in theory anyway, a beginning, middle, and end, or at least of a scene, but it all takes place on one page. What are some of the challenges of that?
Challenges invariably is something being said that doesn't need to be said. A lot of times I'll look at dialogue as, is it doing a good job of being subtext? Is it doing a good job of saying something that the image isn't saying? Is it additive to being layered with the visual storytelling? So I like when I sense that there's a little subtext that's being told, that somebody's trying to be lyrical in their writing. That's one thing I was looking for.
All right, so we'll wrap this up a little bit. I just wanted to say, so the title of this story is Blood Brothers, and from my perspective, we had the kind of broad overview of what maybe submissions would look like, and what type of story you might want to hear. So I took that This Ink Runs Cold title, and I love it. I thought about cold is such something that's very evocative. What other things are associated with that? And I think in Cold Blood, and that even has a crime element to it as well.
It does.
So I maybe took it in a kind of literal way, but trying to work with that. And you talk about almost using it lyrically. That was at least an intention of mine. So that was kind of that very early process here.
Yeah.
And one of the great things that at least I'm seeing is just see that take shape, to see different those differences that just collaborating really brings to that. I don't know. So tell us just one more time, just what's your plans for the book, and where are we going to be able to find it, and what's happening?
My plans for the book are to get it done in a timely fashion in the next month or so, hopefully, as far as the drawing goes and scanning and compositing of the pages. And then getting those to a production level with Jose and kind of proofreading and making sure everything's in shape. We'll shop for the right printer, and we will, Allen Spiegel Fine Arts is going to fund it. We're going to print a nice Van Designé hardcover of all of the stories.
Could you describe that term? That's French word for comics, but is there a specific idea you have in mind?
Yeah, typically a Van Designé is this size and that format. They're anywhere between 24 and 96 pages most of the time, 120. Usually, so we're going to land at around 56. Feels about right. It'll be about that thick, or maybe a little thicker. We'll probably do some sort of cloth band with a spot varnish or something on the cover. The cover that's online may not be the final cover. That might be a title page or something. But we're going to try to design a nice volume that'll feel like an elevated comics offering for people.
What's your Eisner speech going to be about?
I don't know that that's the reason for us to go for this. I will probably, if there's an Eisner speech, I will shout out to you guys. And make this about honestly, Allen Spiegel, where we're sitting, passed away 10 days after Comic-Con last year, and he was a mentor to a lot of us that he repped, but he was also a facilitator of relationships and meeting new people, finding new talent. And this project, Scott Zobak, who runs Allen Spiegel Fine Arts now, and I wanted to do something, we've talked for a while, that would carry through on what Allen was about. And this seemed like an active way to find and meet new people and new talent and piggyback them off of the existing talent. And that was something that Allen loved. He loved networking people and nurturing hopefuls and helping them gain context for what this industry and this art form can be about, how to work with people in a professional way where you respect each other and become friends, because working with your friends is really what this should be about. And making new friends, finding new voices, finding ways of always being a student. So that was really, that's probably what I would speak to.
We're going to check out this cosplay real quick. There they go. All right. Scott, thanks so much for taking some time for working on this.
No, I appreciate
in this very
you for
unique atmosphere.
wanting to talk.
Look for the book soon.
Yeah.